The pregnancy test trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the 2 pink lines. My wife's face was a mix of joy and something else. Fear. Maybe? At the time, I didn't understand why. "James, we're going to have a baby!" she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around me. I hugged her back, but something felt off. We'd been married for 3 years and had always been careful, religiously so. I insisted on protection every single time, no exceptions, since we'd agreed to wait a few more years before starting a family. "But how?" I asked, still processing. "We always use protection." Sarah's expression shifted slightly. "Maybe one broke? It happens, right? Does it matter? We're having a baby." She kissed me before I could respond, her enthusiasm drowning out my confusion. I wish I'd paid more attention to the signs back then. The late nights at the office, the new yoga classes she supposedly started attending, the sudden password changes on her phone. Sarah had always been independent, but something had changed in the past few months. I just couldn't put my finger on it. That evening, while Sarah was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. I'd never been the type to snoop, but the preview notification caught my eye. "Mike. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last time was..." The rest was hidden, but my heart started racing. I knew a Mike from her office, her new project manager who'd transferred in 6 months ago. Sarah had mentioned him a few times, always casually, always in the context of work. But something about that message felt wrong. I heard the shower turn off and quickly moved away from her phone. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake, my mind spinning with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The timing of the pregnancy, the suspicious messages, her recent behavior changes. It all started forming a picture I wasn't ready to see. The next morning, I decided to take a half day at work. I didn't tell Sarah. Instead of heading home, I parked my car across from her office building. The guilt of spying on my own wife ate at me, but the alternative, living with uncertainty, felt worse. At 2:15 p.m., I watched Sarah leave the building. She wasn't heading toward her usual parking spot. Instead, she walked 2 blocks to a small cafe, where a tall, well-dressed man was waiting outside. He greeted her with a familiarity that made my stomach turn, his hand lingering on her lower back as they entered the cafe together. I waited 20 minutes before following them inside. They weren't there. The barista mentioned a couple matching their description had headed upstairs to the private dining area. My hands were shaking as I climbed those stairs, each step bringing me closer to a truth I already suspected but desperately hoped to be wrong about. The private dining area was empty except for a door leading to a small balcony. Through the glass, I saw them. Sarah was pressed against the railing, Mike's hands on her waist as they kissed. My world tilted sideways. I watched, paralyzed, as my wife, my pregnant wife, wrapped her arms around another man's neck with familiar intimacy. I must have made some sound because Sarah's eyes suddenly met mine through the glass. The color drained from her face. "James." She pushed Mike away, straightening her blouse. "This isn't..." I can explain. But I was already heading down the stairs, my vision blurring. Sarah's heels clicked rapidly behind me as she called my name. Outside, the bright afternoon sun felt obscene, mocking the darkness that had just swallowed my life. "James, please." Sarah caught up to me, grabbing my arm. "It's not what you think. Mike and I... It was just a mistake. A one-time thing." I turned to face her, my voice surprisingly steady. "A one-time thing? Is that why you're carrying his child?" Her face crumpled. "What? No. The baby is yours, James. I swear it is. We always used protection, Sarah. Every single time. You really think I'm that stupid?" Mike appeared behind her, his professional demeanor now tinged with obvious discomfort. "Sarah, maybe we should stay out of this," I snapped, then looked back at my wife. "How long?" Sarah's eyes darted between Mike and me. "James, please, can we talk about this at home? Not here." "How long?" She wrapped her arms around herself, tears streaming down her face. "For months," she whispered. "But it didn't mean anything. I love you, James. You're my husband." Mike was just... I was confused, and things at work were stressful and, save it, I held up my hand. For months. So right around when you got that promotion. The promotion she'd been so excited about, the one that came with late meetings and weekend work sessions. Everything was falling into place now. The promotion was legitimate. Sarah protested. This has nothing to do with work. Mike and I, it just happened. Things don't just happen, Sarah. You made choices. Every secret meeting, every lie about working late, every time you came home and kissed me after being with him. Those were all choices. Mike stepped forward, trying to look authoritative despite the situation. Look, James, I know this is a shock, but I cut him off with a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. A shock? Finding out my wife is pregnant with her boss's baby while we've been having protected sex for our entire marriage? Yeah, I'd say that's a bit of a shock. Sarah's mascara was running now, her carefully maintained image crumbling. Please, James, I'll do anything. We can work through this. I'll quit my job, I'll cut off all contact with Mike. Please don't throw away our marriage. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The woman I'd married, the one I'd trusted completely, had never existed. This person in front of me was someone else entirely. A liar, a cheater, someone capable of months of deliberate deception. Our marriage, I said quietly. You threw that away the first time you decided to sleep with him. You just didn't bother to tell me. As I walked away, Sarah called after me, her voice breaking. Where are you going? James, please. We need to talk about this. I didn't turn around. I had some calls to make, starting with our lawyer. The next few days passed in a blur of rage and meticulous planning. I stayed at my brother Ryan's place, ignoring Sarah's constant calls and messages. She cycled between desperate apologies, angry accusations that I was being unreasonable, and tearful reminders about our baby. Each message only strengthened my resolve. You need to hear her out eventually, Ryan suggested one evening, watching me ignore another call. If only to figure out how to handle the divorce. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been documenting every suspicious date and incident from the past 4 months. Oh, I'll hear her out. But on my terms, not hers. The thing about Sarah was that she'd always underestimated me. She saw my trusting nature as naivety, my patience as weakness. Even now, she probably thought I'd eventually calm down and listen to her excuses. She didn't know that while she was leaving voicemails begging for forgiveness, I was methodically dismantling the life we'd built together. First, I contacted our family lawyer, Marcus. He'd handled my parents' estate after their accident 2 years ago, and I trusted him completely. The pregnancy complicates things, he warned during our meeting. Even if you're not the biological father, if you're married when the child is born. I won't be, I interrupted. How quickly can we file? The next step was harder. I drove to Sarah's parents' house, the same house where I'd asked for their blessing before proposing. Carol, Sarah's mother, answered the door with a warm smile that faded when she saw my expression. James? What's wrong? Sarah's been calling us, but she won't say what's happening. I told them everything. They deserved to know why their daughter's marriage was about to implode. Carol cried. Tom, Sarah's father, sat in stony silence, his face growing darker with each detail. We didn't raise her to be this person, Carol whispered when I finished. No, I agreed. But it's who she chose to be. As I was leaving, Tom stopped me. Whatever you're planning, he said quietly. She earned it. The support of Sarah's own parents should have felt like a victory. Instead, it just emphasized how completely she'd betrayed everyone who loved her. Back at Ryan's, I received an email from Mike's wife, Jessica. Yes, he was married too. Something Sarah had conveniently failed to mention. I'd found Jessica's contact information through some basic social media searching and sent her a detailed account of everything I'd discovered. Her response was brief. Can we meet? There's more you should know. We arranged to meet at a small diner the next morning. Jessica turned out to be a petite woman with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw. She brought a stack of papers with her. Mike's done this before, she said without preamble. sliding the papers across the table. 2 years ago, with another employee, she got pregnant too. The company paid her off and transferred her to the London office. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. And you stayed with him? We have kids, she said simply. But I've been gathering evidence ever since. Bank statements, hotel receipts, emails. I was waiting for the right moment. Your wife's pregnancy just moved up my timeline. I looked through the documents, my mind racing. Does Mike know you have all this? Jessica smiled grimly. Not yet, but he will. The question is, do you want to coordinate our moves? Or should we each handle our own spouse? I considered it for a moment. I think we can help each other. I have a plan, but it'll work better with your involvement. I'm listening, she said, leaning forward. As I outlined my ideas, I saw the same cold determination in Jessica's eyes that I felt in my heart. Sarah and Mike had no idea what was coming. They'd played their game thinking they were the only ones who could be clever and deceptive. They were about to learn how wrong they were. After a week of silence, I finally agreed to meet Sarah at our house. Walking in felt surreal. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, yet nothing was the same. Sarah sat at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, looking smaller somehow. The confident, self-assured woman I'd married seemed to have deflated. You've lost weight, she said softly as I sat down across from her. Are you eating? Let's not pretend you care about my well-being. My voice was calm, controlled. I'm here because we need to discuss practical matters. Her face crumpled. Of course I care. James, I know I messed up terribly, but I love you. We can get through this. We can go to counseling, work on rebuilding trust. Like you worked on rebuilding trust with Mike's wife? Sarah's face went pale. What? Jessica sends her regards. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Mike's voice, clearly agitated, discussing their situation with Sarah. Jessica had recorded it during one of their recent arguments. You've been talking to Jessica? Sarah's voice trembled. James, whatever she told you. She told me everything. About Mike's pattern of seducing employees. About the last pregnant mistress who got shipped off to London. Tell me, Sarah, was that your backup plan too? A transfer to another office if things went south. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It wasn't like that. Mike told me he and Jessica were separated. That they were getting divorced. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected. Just like you didn't want to know how it would destroy me when I found out. But here's what's going to happen now. I pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Divorce papers. I'm not interested in fighting about assets. You can keep the house, your car, everything. All I want is a clean break and your signature acknowledging that I'm not the father of your child. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the envelope. You can't just throw away 3 years of marriage. You did that already. I'm just making it official. And what about Mike? She asked, a hint of her old defiance returning. Are you planning some kind of revenge? I smiled, and something in my expression made her lean back. Mike's situation is already handling itself. Jessica's quite thorough. She's been documenting his pattern of workplace relationships for years. The company's board received quite an interesting package of evidence this morning. Sarah's eyes widened. What did you do? Me? Nothing. But it turns out companies don't like executives who make a habit of impregnating their subordinates. Especially when those subordinates file complaints about being coerced into relationships under threat of professional retaliation. That's a lie, Sarah burst out. Mike never threatened me. No? Then you'll have no problem stating that under oath when the company's lawyers investigate. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your perspective on workplace power dynamics and consensual relationships. The color drained from her face as the implications sank in. Her career, her reputation, the careful image she'd built. It was all balanced on a knife's edge. You wouldn't, she whispered. You're right, I wouldn't, because I don't have to do anything. The wheels are already in motion, Sarah. All you have to decide is how much damage you're willing to take with him. I stood up, leaving the divorce papers in front of her. You have 24 hours to sign these. After that, things get considerably more complicated for everyone involved. As I reached the door, Sarah called out, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you, James. You have to believe that." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "The problem, Sarah, is that I don't believe anything you say anymore. But don't worry. Soon you won't have to lie to me ever again." Hashtag the price of trust part 5. The company board's emergency meeting lasted 3 hours. I know because Jessica texted me updates from the parking lot where she waited with her lawyer. When Mike finally emerged from the building, security escort in tow and cardboard box in his arms, his face had the hollow look of a man watching his life collapse in real time. Sarah signed the divorce papers that evening, not out of compliance with my deadline, but because Mike had already thrown her under the bus. Jessica forwarded me his desperate email to the board, where he claimed Sarah had pursued him aggressively, that she'd manipulated him with threats of harassment claims if he didn't continue their relationship. He'd even attached their text messages, carefully selected to support his narrative, of course. "He's trying to save himself," Jessica commented when we met for coffee the next day, claiming he was the victim of a predatory employee rather than a supervisor abusing his position. Classic Mike. I watched Sarah's carefully constructed world unravel with a detachment that surprised me. Her resignation was requested by HR the following morning. The company's legal team was thorough in their damage control, presenting her with a non-disclosure agreement and a modest severance package, far less than what Mike's previous mistress had received. They weren't taking chances this time, not with Jessica's evidence suggesting a pattern of corporate cover-ups. Sarah's parents refused to let her move back home. "Actions have consequences," Tom had said when she called crying. Carol later told me they'd offered to help her find a therapist instead. "She needs to understand why she does these things," she explained, voice heavy with maternal grief. "This isn't the daughter we raised." The final blow came from an unexpected quarter. Sarah's sister Emma, who'd been her closest confidant, publicly cut ties through a scathing social media post about betrayal and family values. It went viral within their social circle, forcing Sarah to shut down all her accounts as former friends and colleagues connected the dots. Mike didn't fare much better. Jessica's divorce filing included evidence of his multiple affairs, unauthorized use of company resources for personal trysts, and financial mismanagement. His reputation in the industry was ruined. The last I heard, he was considering a move to another state. I ran into Sarah one last time, 3 months after everything fell apart. She was leaving her doctor's appointment as I was walking into the coffee shop next door. Her pregnancy was showing now, a visible reminder of the lies that had destroyed our marriage. "James," she said, stopping awkwardly. I've been wanting to reach out." "Don't." My voice was quiet but firm. "Please, just let me say this." Her eyes were clear, lacking the manipulation I'd grown to recognize. "You were right. About everything. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I did what I did. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry. Not just for the affair, but for who I became, who I was all along, maybe." I studied her face, the face I'd once known better than my own. "You know what the worst part was, Sarah? Not the affair, not even the baby. It was realizing that every morning for months, you woke up next to me, looked me in the eye, and chose to lie. Over and over again. That kind of betrayal doesn't just break trust. It breaks the entire foundation of who we thought we were together." She wiped away a tear. "I know. I destroyed something precious, and I have to live with that. I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. You deserve peace." "I have peace," I replied. "The moment I stopped trying to understand why you did it, and simply accepted that you did, I found my peace. I don't hate you anymore, Sarah. I don't feel anything for you at all." I walked past her into the coffee shop, ordered my drink, and didn't look back. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about causing pain or destruction. Sometimes it's about walking away and letting people face the natural consequences of their own actions. Sarah and Mike had built their relationship on lies and betrayal. All I had to do was step back and watch it burn itself to the ground. My phone buzzed. A message from my real estate agent about a promising house listing in another city. It was time for a fresh start, in a place where every street corner didn't hold memories of betrayal. As I drove to view the property, I felt lighter somehow. Sarah had taught me a valuable lesson about trust and consequences. It wasn't the lesson she'd intended, but it was one I'd never forget. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos.